Subscribe to my YouTube channel, share it with your friends, and comment your thoughts. The sharp screech of tires outside the tiny diner made everyone inside freeze. Sophie wiped her hands on her apron, glancing nervously toward the large front window. She had worked at this diner for almost 7 years and had never seen anything like this. A strange rumble grew louder, the vibrations making the forks and knives on the tables jitter. The ground almost seemed to pulse beneath her feet. She pushed through the swinging doors leading to the dining area, heart thudding in her chest. Outside, rolling into the small gravel parking lot, was a massive tank. Not a truck. Not a bus. A military tank, huge, solid, gray-green, with a long barrel pointing directly into the sky. Behind it came another. And another. 3 tanks, followed by a row of heavy military jeeps, filled the narrow lot, blocking every possible exit. Customers inside the diner gasped and backed away from the windows. Phones were out, recording, snapping pictures, whispering in panic. "Is this a drill?" someone asked in a shaky voice. "Are we under attack?" another muttered. Sophie's mind raced. This was a sleepy town in Ohio, far from any military base. There was no reason, no logic, for tanks to be here. She wiped her sweaty palms on her apron again and tried to breathe. Her boss, Mr. Carter, a gruff man in his 60s, came running from the back, his face pale. "What in God's name is happening?" he barked, trying to sound tough, but his voice cracked halfway through. Sophie didn't know what to say. No one did. They all stood there, stunned, staring at the soldiers now climbing down from the tanks, fully dressed in combat gear, carrying radios and looking serious. One soldier, a tall man with sharp features and a stiff walk, stepped forward and banged on the glass door of the diner. Knock, knock, knock. The sound echoed through the silent room. "Mr." Carter hesitated, then slowly approached the door and unlocked it. The soldier didn't wait for an invitation. He stepped inside, boots thudding heavily against the linoleum floor. "Who's Sophie Reynolds?" the soldier asked loudly, scanning the room. Every head turned toward Sophie at once. She felt her face flush, heat creeping up her neck. "Me," she stammered, raising her hand slightly. The soldier nodded once and lifted a walkie-talkie to his mouth. "She's here," he said into it. A moment later, the crowd outside parted, and a man appeared. He wasn't wearing a uniform. He wasn't carrying a weapon. He looked like an ordinary man, maybe in his late 60s, wearing a dark jacket and jeans. But there was something about the way the soldiers snapped to attention around him that told Sophie he was no ordinary man. The man walked slowly toward her, his gaze kind but intense. When he stopped a few feet away, Sophie could see the deep lines etched into his face, the signs of a hard, long life. He smiled warmly and said in a voice that carried through the silent diner. "You don't remember me, do you?" Sophie blinked, heart hammering. "No, sir. I don't think we've met," she whispered. The man chuckled softly, a dry, raspy sound. "You bought me dinner yesterday," he said. Suddenly, it clicked. Yesterday, during the evening shift, a quiet, tired-looking old man had come in, wearing a worn-out army jacket. He had sat alone at a booth, ordered the cheapest meal on the menu, a small bowl of soup and a sandwich, and when the bill came, he had fumbled through his wallet, struggling to find enough cash. Sophie had felt a pang of sympathy. Without telling him, she had quietly paid the bill herself and told him it was on the house. He had tried to argue, but she had smiled and insisted. It had seemed like such a small thing. Now, standing in front of her, surrounded by tanks and soldiers, he said, "You didn't just pay for my meal. You honored my service. And that means more than you can imagine." Sophie's knees went weak. She grabbed the counter to steady herself. The man continued, "You see, I'm not just a veteran. I'm the founder of Shield of Honor, an organization that helps forgotten soldiers across the country. And today, we wanted to show you what a small act of kindness can truly mean." He turned and signaled to the soldiers outside. To Sophie's amazement, the soldiers began unloading boxes from the jeeps, boxes filled with supplies, food, equipment, and other essentials. "Every soldier in this unit has donated today in your honor," the man said. "To say thank you. Not just for paying for my meal, but for seeing me. For treating me like a human being when so many just walk past." Tears filled Sophie's eyes. The entire diner was silent, many customers wiping their faces. "But that's not all," the man added, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a letter and handed it to her. Sophie opened it with trembling hands. It was a full scholarship offer, from a veterans association, for Sophie to attend the culinary school she had always dreamed about but could never afford. She stared at the paper, unable to speak, tears falling freely now. The man smiled warmly again. "You showed compassion when no one else did. And now, it's our turn to serve you." Cliffhanger ending of Part 1. Just when Sophie thought her heart couldn't hold any more shock or gratitude, another vehicle pulled up outside the diner. It wasn't a tank. It was a long, sleek, black limousine. The door opened slowly. And from inside, stepped someone Sophie recognized immediately, someone she never, ever expected to see in her lifetime. Her legs buckled as she gasped aloud. The diner door creaked open as the man from the black limousine stepped out. Gasps filled the room. A few customers even stood up, mouths open in stunned recognition. Sophie clutched the counter with both hands, her breath catching in her throat. It couldn't be. But it was. Jonathan Hale. One of the richest men in America. Billionaire philanthropist. Former military officer. Owner of Hale Enterprises, a global powerhouse that funded veteran organizations, hospitals, and scholarships across the world. What was he doing here, in her tiny town, stepping into her humble diner? Jonathan's presence was magnetic. Tall, broad-shouldered, with silver-streaked hair and piercing blue eyes, he walked toward Sophie with a purpose, every step measured, powerful. The soldiers outside straightened their backs even further, and the crowd inside parted like the Red Sea. Sophie could barely breathe. Jonathan reached her, offering a warm smile that somehow felt personal despite his intimidating aura. "You must be Sophie Reynolds," he said, his voice smooth but firm. She nodded, too stunned to speak. Jonathan chuckled gently, easing some of the tension in the room. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I should have introduced myself yesterday." Sophie blinked in confusion. "Yesterday," she repeated. Jonathan nodded. "The man you helped yesterday, Mr. Carter, he's my old commander. We served together overseas. He's family to me." Sophie's heart raced. Jonathan continued, "When he called me last night and told me what you did, I knew I had to come in person." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a second envelope, this one thick and heavy. "For you," he said, handing it to her. Hands trembling, Sophie opened it. Inside was a certified letter, and a cashier's check. Her eyes widened. $100,000. Written in her name. The diner gasped again when she read the number aloud. Jonathan smiled softly. "This is just the beginning," he said. "Consider it a small thank you for your kindness, and an investment in your future. You've proven you have the kind of heart this world needs more of." Sophie's hands shook. Tears blurred her vision. She had grown up poor. Her parents had struggled all their lives. She had given up on dreams of college or owning anything more than a beat-up second-hand car. And now, standing in her modest diner uniform, she was holding more money than she had ever seen in her life. But Jonathan wasn't finished. He turned to the crowd and spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. We're launching a new project here, a training program for veterans and underprivileged youth. And we want Sophie Reynolds to be the face of it. Gasps echoed again. Cameras flashed as people took photos. Sophie stared at him, overwhelmed. Me, she croaked. Jonathan nodded. Yes. You showed the kind of leadership, compassion, and courage that can't be taught in schools. We need people like you to inspire others. Flashback, Sophie's past. As the shock settled into her bones, Sophie's mind drifted back to a younger version of herself. She remembered being a little girl, watching her mother serve soup at the local shelter, even when they barely had enough for themselves. She remembered her father, a war veteran who had lost a leg overseas, teaching her that real honor wasn't about medals, it was about kindness. Those lessons had stayed with her. Even when she worked double shifts to help her parents. Even when she gave up her college dreams to pay the family's mortgage. Even when she quietly paid for strangers' meals at the diner, hoping to pass a little kindness forward. And now, all of that had somehow led to this moment. Back to present. Sophie wiped her eyes and tried to find her voice. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Jonathan smiled kindly. Just say yes, he said. The whole diner seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Sophie laughed softly, still teary-eyed, and nodded. Yes, she said, her voice stronger this time. Yes. I would be honored. The room erupted into applause. Customers clapped and cheered. Mr. Carter, standing behind the counter, wiped his own eyes and gave Sophie a proud thumbs up. Jonathan stepped aside, allowing his team to start bringing in banners and flyers explaining the new project, the Reynolds Initiative, named after Sophie herself. But just when it seemed like the day couldn't possibly hold any more surprises, the ground shook again. Everyone turned toward the window. Another black SUV pulled up. And out stepped three men in dark suits, government suits. Stern faces. Quick, sharp movements. The diner's excitement froze instantly, turning to confusion and a hint of fear. Jonathan's smile faded too. He stepped slightly in front of Sophie, protective. The tallest man in the dark suit approached and flashed a badge. Department of Homeland Security. Sophie's stomach dropped. Miss Reynolds, the man said, voice clipped and official, we need to speak with you immediately. Privately. Jonathan narrowed his eyes. About what? He asked sharply. The agent didn't blink. We believe Miss Reynolds may have unknowingly become involved in a matter of national security. The entire diner went dead silent. National security? Sophie's mind reeled. Had she done something wrong? Was this about the tanks? About Jonathan? She looked helplessly at Jonathan, who gave her a small, reassuring nod. Go with them, he said quietly. I'll be right behind you. Heart hammering, legs shaking, Sophie followed the agents outside into the blinding sunlight. They led her to the back of the SUV and opened the door. Inside, a laptop screen glowed brightly. On it, Sophie saw something that made her blood run cold. A photo of herself, taken just yesterday, handing the free meal to the veteran. But there was more. Behind her, half hidden by the diner's window reflection, was a man. A man she didn't recognize. And according to the agents, that man was now the subject of an international manhunt. A suspected spy. And somehow, Sophie's simple act of kindness had pulled her into the middle of a global scandal. The agent leaned in close and said in a low voice. Miss Reynolds, what you did yesterday wasn't just generous. It might have just saved this entire town. Sophie's world tilted again. And this time, she knew. Nothing would ever be the same. The inside of the black SUV smelled faintly of leather and tension. Sophie sat stiffly on the edge of the seat, staring at the laptop screen. Her own face stared back at her, frozen in the act of handing a meal to a veteran. Behind her, almost hidden by the glare on the diner's window, was a shadowy figure. Dark jacket. Cap pulled low. Face turned just enough away to be unrecognizable. The Homeland Security agent closed the laptop with a soft snap. "Miss Reynolds," he said gravely, "we believe the man in this photo is not who he pretended to be. We've been tracking him for months. He's wanted in connection with several serious incidents across the country, and possibly internationally." Sophie swallowed hard. "But I didn't even speak to him," she stammered. "I didn't even notice him." The agent nodded. "That's exactly why we're here. You were an unwitting witness to something much larger than you realize." Sophie's heart pounded in her ears. "What does that mean? Am I in danger?" The agent exchanged a brief, unreadable glance with his colleague before answering. "We're not sure yet. But it's possible this individual saw you. Interacted with you. And if he believes you could identify him." He let the sentence hang ominously in the air. Sophie's hands trembled in her lap. From the window, she could see Jonathan Hale still standing outside the diner, watching closely, his face a mask of concern and determination. Seeing him gave her a small, shaky piece of courage. "So, what do you need me to do?" she asked, her voice trembling but strong. The agent smiled slightly, almost approvingly. "We need you to come with us. Cooperate. Help us piece together everything you saw yesterday. Every detail matters." Sophie nodded slowly, the weight of the moment settling onto her shoulders. "I'll help," she said. "Whatever it takes." Inside the investigation. Minutes later, Sophie found herself inside a makeshift command center. The Homeland Security team had set up shop inside the town's abandoned library, computers humming and agents moving briskly around folding tables stacked with files and monitors. They led Sophie to a chair at the center of the room. Bright lights overhead. Recorders clicking on. The lead agent, whose badge read Agent Rowe, leaned forward. "Take us back," he said. "Start from the beginning. What did you see yesterday?" Sophie closed her eyes, forcing herself to remember. The tired veteran. The smell of soup and coffee. The crowded diner. The flash of the door opening. She remembered seeing someone standing at the counter briefly. Paying cash. Leaving no tip. Something about him had felt off. But she had been too busy to think much about it. "He was nervous," she said slowly. Kept looking over his shoulder. He left quickly, maybe 15 minutes before the veteran finished eating. Agent Rowe scribbled something in his notebook. "Anything else? Anything unusual about what he was carrying?" Sophie frowned, thinking harder. "He had a bag," she said finally. "A small black messenger bag. He kept it close to him, like he didn't want anyone touching it." Rowe's eyes sharpened. "And after he left? Anything else?" Sophie shook her head. "I was busy with customers. I didn't even notice when he slipped out." Rowe leaned back, tapping his pen against his chin thoughtfully. "That bag might have contained classified information," he said. "Or worse." Sophie's blood ran cold. "Worse?" she echoed. Rowe nodded grimly. "We have reason to believe he was carrying materials meant to compromise national security." A shocking twist. As the agents processed Sophie's statement, another agent burst into the room, face flushed. "Sir!" he barked. "Update from Washington. The suspect has been linked to foreign intelligence. He's believed to be part of a larger network operating inside the country." Rowe's expression darkened. He turned back to Sophie. "Miss Reynolds," he said urgently, "you're not just a witness anymore. You're a potential target." Sophie's mouth went dry. "We're placing you under protective custody, immediately," Rowe said. For your own safety. Before she could protest, he waved over 2 agents who moved swiftly to her side. You'll be safe, one assured her. We have safe houses set up. No one will find you. As they hustled her toward a waiting armored vehicle outside, Sophie caught one last glimpse of Jonathan Hale, standing tall and calm, giving her a reassuring nod. Her heart ached with gratitude and fear. The safe house. Hours later, Sophie found herself inside a nondescript house at the edge of town. Thick curtains blocked the windows. Cameras blinked silently in the corners. 2 agents stationed outside like statues. Sophie sat on a battered couch, trying to make sense of her new reality. Just 2 days ago, she had been an ordinary waitress, struggling to make ends meet. Now she was entangled in an international manhunt. She buried her face in her hands. It was too much. Too fast. Too impossible. Her phone buzzed quietly. One of the agents handed it to her. An encrypted, secured line. It was Jonathan. Sophie, his voice rumbled through the speaker, warm and steady. Are you all right? Tears filled her eyes again at the simple kindness of his words. I think so, she whispered. But I'm scared. I know, he said gently. But you're not alone. We're going to get through this. I promise. Something about the way he said it, so calm, so certain, made her believe him. For the first time since the tanks rolled up to her diner, Sophie felt a tiny flicker of hope. The warning. That night, just as Sophie was finally starting to relax, a loud bang shattered the silence. The front door shook violently. Windows rattled in their frames. The agents shouted orders, weapons drawn. Sophie froze, heart hammering against her ribs. Outside, the security cameras captured a dark figure sprinting across the lawn, fast, purposeful. A figure wearing a dark jacket and cap. Exactly like the man from the photo. Alarms blared. The agents rushed Sophie into a panic room, a hidden, reinforced room in the center of the house. Inside, the walls were thick steel. No windows. Only one door, sealed from the inside. The door slammed shut behind her. Sophie sat in the dark, knees drawn to her chest, listening to the chaos outside. Gunshots. Shouts. Then, silence. Terrible, heavy silence. The aftermath. It felt like hours before the door finally opened. Agent Rowe stood there, face grim. The house is secure, he said. The intruder is gone. Sophie stumbled out, weak-kneed. Gone, she whispered. Who was he? Rowe shook his head. Still unknown. But it's clear he was after you. Sophie shivered violently. This was real. She was in real danger. Unexpected help. 2 days later, as Sophie remained hidden, new forces arrived. Jonathan Hale had called in favors from the highest levels of government. Now, Sophie had an entire private security team, highly trained, watching over her day and night. Still, the questions gnawed at her. Why her? Why had a simple act of kindness pulled her into this nightmare? And most importantly, what was in that man's bag? No one seemed to have answers. Until one night, when Jonathan visited the safe house personally. He sat across from Sophie, his expression grave. There's something you need to know, he said. He placed a small, battered notebook on the table between them. Found in the bushes outside the safe house. Dropped by the intruder. Sophie picked it up carefully. The pages were filled with strange codes, maps, and symbols. And right in the center of one page. Her name. Sophie Reynolds. Written in bold, angry letters. The battered notebook sat between them like a living thing, pulsing with the weight of unseen secrets. Sophie stared at her name, scribbled in jagged, angry handwriting. A shiver ran down her spine. It felt personal. Targeted. Why? Jonathan Hale sat across the table, elbows resting on his knees, head bowed low as if he too felt the heavy pull of what they had just discovered. "This isn't random," Jonathan said quietly. "Someone has been watching you. Maybe even before you paid for the veteran's meal." Sophie's mouth went dry. "Why me?" she whispered. "I'm just a waitress." Jonathan's sharp eyes lifted to hers. "You're more than that now. A hidden connection." Over the next few hours, the safe house buzzed with a new kind of urgency. The agent scanned the notebook carefully, each page photographed and analyzed. Maps, codes, strange numeric sequences. Most of it unreadable even to trained eyes. But a few pages stood out. One showed the layout of Sophie's diner, hand-sketched, with exits and blind spots marked. Another listed times and dates, Sophie's work shifts. They had been tracking her movements. How long? Why? Agent Rowe gathered the team around in the small living room, pinning photocopies of the notebook pages onto a corkboard. "We're missing something," he said. "Something big." He tapped a finger against one of the dates. 3 weeks ago. Sophie's diner. There was a meeting held at table 9. 2 unknown men, one local, one foreign. Sophie's brow furrowed. "I don't remember anyone unusual." Jonathan leaned forward. "Do you remember if anyone left anything behind? A briefcase, a package?" Sophie searched her memory, biting her lip. Then it hit her. I did find something," she said slowly. "A napkin. Someone had scribbled a long number on it. I thought it was a phone number." Jonathan and Rowe exchanged a sharp look. "Do you still have it?" Rowe asked urgently. Sophie shook her head, her heart sinking. "I threw it away. I didn't think it mattered." For a moment, silence filled the room. Then Rowe straightened. "Then we need to go back. Back to the diner." Night had fallen by the time they reached the diner. It was still cordoned off, crime scene tape fluttering in the cold breeze. Agents unlocked the door, sweeping the place for any lingering threats. The inside was eerily quiet. Sophie stepped into the diner she had once called home, feeling like a stranger in a ghost town. Dust motes floated in the air. Chairs were stacked upside down on tables. A forgotten coffee cup sat cold on the counter. She moved slowly to table 9. It looked ordinary. Nothing special. But as she ran her fingers along the underside of the table, she felt it, a bump. Something taped there. Her fingers closed around it, and she carefully pulled it free. A tiny, worn USB drive. Agent Rowe's face tightened. "This could be it," he said grimly. They hurried back to the safe house. The drive. Inside the control room, an analyst inserted the USB drive into a secured, isolated laptop. For a moment, the screen stayed blank. Then a single file appeared. Project Liberty. Password protected. Jonathan stared at the screen. "That's classified terminology," he said in a low voice. "Very high level. Government secrets. Possibly black ops." Sophie's heart raced. How did something like that end up taped under a table in my diner? Rowe's face was grim. "Someone used your diner for a handoff. They were supposed to collect it. But something went wrong." Jonathan nodded. "And now, whoever was supposed to receive it, thinks Sophie knows more than she does." Deeper into the rabbit hole. The agents called in a specialized cyber team to crack the file. While they worked, Jonathan sat with Sophie in the small lounge area. He handed her a cup of hot tea, and for a few precious minutes, they sat in silence. She studied him. His broad shoulders, the quiet strength in his presence. "You've done this before, haven't you?" she asked. Jonathan's mouth twisted into a half-smile. "A long time ago. I used to work in the shadows. Different life. Different rules." Sophie nodded slowly. "Why are you helping me?" she asked softly. Jonathan's eyes met hers, serious and steady. "Because you helped someone when you didn't have to. And because good people are rare, Sophie. Too rare to lose." For a moment, she could hardly breathe. The crack. Hours later, the cyber team finally cracked the file. What they found stunned everyone. Inside were detailed blueprints. High-security facilities. Power grids. Military installations. And more terrifying, schedules for government convoys. Including one set to pass through their state in just 2 days. Jonathan whistled low. "They weren't just planning a theft," he said. "They were planning a full assault." Rowe nodded grimly. "And now, thanks to Sophie, we have a chance to stop it." But even as relief washed over her, Sophie felt a cold sense of dread. If they had the information, it meant the enemy would know they lost it. And they would come looking. The betrayal. The next evening, as Sophie was sitting quietly by the window, a soft knock came at the back door. One of the junior agents, a young man named Lewis, moved to open it. Sophie didn't think twice, until she saw the flash of fear on Agent Rowe's face. "Wait!" Rowe barked. But it was too late. The door burst open, and a group of masked men stormed in. Chaos erupted. Gunfire. Shouts. The smell of smoke. Sophie dropped to the ground, heart pounding, crawling toward the panic room. Jonathan was by her side instantly, grabbing her hand, dragging her to safety. Inside the panic room, they sealed the door just seconds before a loud explosion shook the house. Jonathan pulled her into his arms, shielding her as debris rained down outside. "We've been compromised," he growled. "But how?" Sophie gasped, terrified. Jonathan's face was like stone. "Someone on the inside. Someone we trusted. The Great Escape." When the noise died down, they opened the panic room cautiously. The house was in ruins. Agents lay injured but alive. The masked men had escaped. But worse. The USB drive was gone. Agent Rowe stood in the wreckage, fists clenched at his sides. "They knew exactly what they were looking for," he said bitterly. Sophie stared at the shattered remains of the laptop. The information was out again. And this time, the enemy was ahead. A new plan. "We have no choice," Jonathan said later that night. "We have to find them before they disappear." Rowe nodded grimly. "And Sophie's coming with us. She's the only one who can identify the man from the diner." Sophie's stomach twisted. She hadn't asked for any of this. But she knew now she couldn't turn away. Too many lives were at stake. "I'm in," she said, surprising even herself. Jonathan smiled, a small, proud smile. "Good. Because we're going to need every bit of courage you've got." The road ahead. The next morning, under heavy escort, Sophie, Jonathan, and Agent Rowe set out on a desperate chase. They followed a trail of clues. Credit card receipts. Traffic cameras. Anonymous tips. Everywhere they went, they were just a few steps behind the enemy. It felt hopeless. Until one night, at a desolate gas station near the state border, Sophie spotted something. A man in a dark jacket. A cap pulled low over his eyes. Moving with a familiar, nervous energy. Her heart leapt. "That's him," she whispered fiercely. Jonathan and Rowe sprang into action. But just as they moved to intercept, the man turned. And Sophie saw his face clearly for the first time. Her blood froze. Because she recognized him. Not from the diner. From somewhere much closer. Someone she had trusted. Someone who had smiled at her. Helped her. Someone who should have been protecting her. The young agent. Louis. Sophie stood frozen under the flickering gas station lights, her heart hammering against her ribs. Louis. The young, soft-spoken agent who had smiled reassuringly at her every morning. The one who had brought her coffee when she couldn't sleep. The one who had promised, again and again, that she was safe. He wasn't who he said he was. And now he was standing just a few feet away, slipping into a black SUV, disappearing into the night. Jonathan's voice broke through her shock. "Sophie, get in the car. Now." Before she could even think, he grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the waiting government SUV. Agent Rowe slammed the door shut behind them, barking orders into his radio. "Suspect moving eastbound on Route 22. All units converge." The vehicle roared to life, tires screeching against the cracked asphalt as they peeled out after Louis. The chase. They sped through the empty countryside, headlights slicing through the darkness. Louis's black SUV was just a blur in the distance, weaving dangerously across the deserted highway. Jonathan gritted his teeth, gripping the steering wheel tight. He knows we're onto him. He's not going to stop. Rowe reloaded his weapon grimly. If he gets across the border, we lose him. And the information. Sophie sat in the back seat, trembling. She couldn't wrap her head around it. Louis had been inside the operation from the beginning. Watching her. Manipulating her. Feeding information to the enemy. All that kindness. All that concern. Had been a lie. She clenched her fists, a new kind of fire burning in her chest. Not again. She wouldn't let them use her anymore. Trap on the bridge. Ahead, flashing blue and red lights lit up the night. A blockade. State troopers had set up a makeshift barrier on the old Mason Bridge, the last crossing before the border. Louis's SUV barreled toward it, brakes squealing. At the last second, he swerved. The SUV spun wildly, crashing into the side railing. Before anyone could react, Louis stumbled out of the driver's side, clutching a duffel bag. He ran. Jonathan slammed the brakes, and they all piled out of the car. Guns drawn, they gave chase. Sophie ran too, adrenaline making her faster than she ever thought possible. Up ahead, Louis climbed onto the steel frame of the bridge, trying to escape through the exposed beams. "Stop!" Jonathan shouted. "You have nowhere to go." Louis turned, wild-eyed, breathing hard. For a moment, the world seemed to freeze. The river roared below. Wind howled through the skeletal beams. And Louis stared straight at Sophie. "You don't understand," he shouted, voice cracking. "I had no choice." Sophie stepped forward, trembling. "Why, Louis? Why betray us?" He laughed bitterly, a broken, ugly sound. "They offered me a way out," he said. They promised I could save someone I loved." He pulled something from his jacket, a photograph. A little girl. His daughter. "I had no choice," he repeated, tears streaming down his face. "They said they'd kill her if I didn't help them." For a moment, Sophie's anger faltered. She understood desperation. She knew what it meant to want to save someone at any cost. But still. So many lives were at risk because of him. Jonathan raised his weapon. "Drop the bag, Louis. Walk toward me. Now." Louis hesitated. Then, slowly, he dropped the duffel bag onto the metal beams. It clattered noisily. He took a step forward. And the beam under his foot gave way with a sickening crack. Sophie gasped. Louis lost his balance, arms flailing. For one terrifying second, he dangled over the raging river. No! Sophie cried, instinctively rushing forward. She grabbed his wrist, holding on with all her strength. Jonathan cursed under his breath, lunging to help. "Hold on, Sophie," he shouted. Louis's eyes met hers, full of fear, regret, and something else. Hope. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Then he let go. Sophie screamed as his hand slipped from her grasp. Louis plunged into the dark river below, swallowed instantly by the churning water. Gone. Aftermath. They searched for hours, but no body was ever found. The river was too fast, too deep. Louis had vanished, either drowned or disappeared into the night. Sophie sat wrapped in a blanket on the back of an ambulance, staring blankly at the horizon. Everything felt numb. Rowe approached, grim-faced. "We recovered the bag," he said quietly. "It's intact. The drive is inside. Along with more documents." Sophie nodded dully. "Great." Jonathan crouched beside her, resting a hand lightly on her shoulder. "You did everything you could," he said gently. "You tried to save him." Hot tears welled up in her eyes. "I don't know if he deserved saving," she whispered. Jonathan squeezed her shoulder. "Maybe not. But that's what makes you different from them. The truth comes out." Back at the new safe house, they examined the recovered documents. What they found was even more horrifying than before. The enemy wasn't just planning an attack. They were planning a full-scale takeover of key infrastructure, communications, power, water supplies, everything needed to cripple the country from within. And the next phase was set to launch in just 48 hours. They had precious little time. Rowe convened an emergency meeting. "We need to act now," he said. "We can't wait for backup. We have to hit their main compound ourselves." Jonathan nodded grimly. "We know where they're hiding." Louis's documents included GPS coordinates. An abandoned quarry about 50 miles west. He turned to Sophie. "You don't have to come," he said quietly. "You've already done more than anyone could ask." Sophie looked around at the faces in the room, worn, battered, but determined. She thought of all the lives that would be lost if they failed. She thought of Louis's daughter. Of all the daughters, sons, mothers, and fathers out there who would suffer. And she stood up. "I'm coming," she said firmly. "I'm seeing this through." Jonathan smiled faintly. "I figured you'd say that." Preparing for battle. The next day was a blur of preparation. Body armor. Weapons training. Tactical briefings. Sophie learned how to move silently, how to signal for help, how to stay alive. She wasn't a soldier. She wasn't even a spy. But she had something stronger. A reason. At dusk, the team loaded into 2 black SUVs, driving in silence toward the abandoned quarry. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in bloody streaks of red and gold. Sophie felt her heart pounding. This was it. No turning back. The quarry. The quarry loomed ahead, an eerie scar on the earth. Rusting machinery littered the landscape. Shadows twisted and shifted in the gathering dark. Jonathan led the way, moving swiftly and silently between cover. Rowe covered the rear. Sophie stayed close, every sense on high alert. They reached a ridge overlooking the main compound. Below them, tents and trucks were clustered around a series of makeshift buildings. Men with rifles patrolled the perimeter. At least 24 hostiles, Rowe whispered. Maybe more inside. Jonathan studied the layout carefully. "We split into 2 teams. Create a diversion at the south entrance. Sophie, you come with me. We're going for the command tent." Sophie nodded, fear churning in her stomach. But she was ready. She had to be. Into the fire. The diversion started with a controlled explosion, one of the fuel tanks near the south gate. The entire compound lit up with fire and confusion. Gunfire erupted. Shouts filled the air. Under the cover of chaos, Sophie and Jonathan slipped down the ridge, weaving between shadows. They reached the command tent. Jonathan signaled, 3 fingers down. 3 seconds. Sophie took a deep breath. On 3, Jonathan ripped open the tent flap and stormed inside. Sophie followed close behind. Inside, a handful of men scrambled for weapons. Jonathan moved like a force of nature, disarming and disabling them before they could react. Sophie spotted the target, the server rack Lewis's documents had described. She ran to it, pulling the hard drive free. Gunfire burst outside. "Move!" Jonathan barked. They sprinted back toward the extraction point, dodging bullets and shouting. The whole place was coming down around them. But just as they reached the edge of the compound, a figure stepped out of the shadows, gun raised. And Sophie stopped dead. Because she knew that face too. Not from the agency. Not from the diner. From her own past. From a life she had tried desperately to forget. Her estranged brother. The one she hadn't seen in almost 10 years. Standing there. Working for the enemy. For one heart-stopping moment, Sophie couldn't breathe. There he stood, Daniel. Her brother. Older by just 3 years, yet in that moment, he looked like a stranger. His once kind eyes were now hard and cold. A scar ran down his jawline. And the way he held that gun, steady, unflinching, made her stomach turn. "Sophie," he said, almost gently. "You shouldn't have come here." The world spun. Noise from the burning compound blurred into a dull roar in her ears. Jonathan moved protectively in front of her, gun raised. "Drop your weapon," he barked. Daniel didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled, a bitter, broken smile. "You really don't understand, do you?" Daniel said, voice low. "You think you're saving the country? You're saving a machine that chews people up and spits them out." Sophie's voice cracked as she finally found the strength to speak. "Daniel. What happened to you?" He laughed bitterly. "What happened?" "I woke up." Behind him, more armed men began gathering, forming a loose semicircle. They were outnumbered. Badly. Jonathan cursed under his breath, scanning for an escape. But Sophie only saw Daniel. Her brother. The boy who had bandaged her scraped knees. The boy who had promised to protect her from nightmares. Now he was the nightmare. The standoff. "Let them go," Sophie said, forcing her voice to steady. "This doesn't have to end like this." Daniel's face twisted with something almost like pain. It was never going to end any other way. He gestured with his weapon. "Hand over the drive. Walk away. I'll make sure you're protected." Jonathan shook his head. "You think we trust anything you say?" Daniel's gaze softened slightly when he looked at Sophie. "I'm not your enemy, Soph. I'm trying to build something better. A world where people like you and me don't get crushed." Tears stung Sophie's eyes. "You're helping people who would destroy everything good we have left." Daniel's hands tightened on the gun. "They lied to you," he hissed. "They used you. They made you believe you were part of something noble. But it's all a game to them. Power. Control." Sophie swallowed hard. Maybe, once, Daniel had believed he was fighting for something better. Maybe. But somewhere along the way, he had lost himself. And now, too many innocent lives were hanging in the balance. She stepped forward, raising her hands slowly. I don't want to fight you, she said softly. But I will. Daniel's jaw tightened. For a split second, Sophie thought she saw him hesitate. But the men behind him cocked their guns, and the moment was gone. The explosion. Before anyone could move, a deafening explosion rocked the compound. The ground shook violently. Everyone staggered. Black smoke billowed into the sky. Move! Jonathan shouted. He grabbed Sophie's arm, dragging her toward the trees. Gunfire erupted around them. The enemy forces scattered, shouting orders, trying to regroup. In the chaos, Sophie saw Daniel disappear into the smoke. Her heart twisted painfully. But there was no time to think. Bullets whizzed past their heads as they sprinted for the extraction point. Every breath burned. Every muscle screamed. Sophie clutched the hard drive to her chest like it was her own beating heart. They had to get it out. It was everything. Betrayal upon betrayal. They reached the extraction vehicle, an armored SUV hidden in the trees. Jonathan slammed the doors shut and floored the gas pedal. They sped away from the burning compound, hearts pounding. But halfway down the dirt road, something felt wrong. Sophie glanced in the rearview mirror. Another black SUV was following them. Fast. Hold on. Jonathan shouted. He swerved, trying to lose them. Shots rang out, shattering the back window. Rowe, riding shotgun, fired back furiously. The enemy vehicle closed the distance. Then, without warning, it rammed them. Hard. The SUV skidded off the road, crashing into a ditch. Sophie's head slammed against the window. Stars exploded behind her eyes. When she blinked back consciousness, masked men were pulling her from the wreckage. Jonathan was fighting, swinging wildly, but there were too many. Sophie struggled, kicked, screamed, but they pinned her arms behind her back. One of them ripped the hard drive from her grasp. No, she cried. But they were already backing away, guns trained on them. In seconds, the enemy SUV peeled away, disappearing into the night. The drive was gone. And with it, everything they had fought for. Regrouping. Hours later, battered and bruised, Sophie sat in another safe house. Rowe was on the phone, shouting at someone in Washington. Jonathan sat silently by the window, a haunted look on his face. Sophie stared at her bloodied hands. They had lost. After everything. After Lewis's death, after the betrayal, after the battle at the quarry. They had failed. I'm sorry, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Jonathan finally looked at her. This isn't over, he said, voice low but fierce. This is just the beginning. Sophie wiped her face. But the drive. He shook his head. They think they have the only copy. A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. But thanks to you. We still have the backup. He pulled a small flash drive from his pocket. Sophie gasped. You made a copy? Jonathan nodded. Always have a plan B. For the first time in what felt like forever, hope flickered in Sophie's chest. Facing the past. They relocated to a secure federal building downtown. There, agents worked around the clock to decrypt the backup. The evidence they uncovered was overwhelming. Names. Accounts. Secret meetings. Plans for coordinated cyberattacks. And direct links to known terrorist organizations. It was enough to take down half of the organization's leadership. But one name leapt off the screen and burned itself into Sophie's mind. Daniel Lawson. Her brother. Wanted for treason. Sophie closed her eyes, breathing heavily. She had hoped, somewhere deep inside, that he could still be saved. But now he was beyond her reach. A knock at the door broke her reverie. Jonathan entered, a folder in hand. "You ready?" he asked. Sophie squared her shoulders. "As ready as I'll ever be." They had a press conference to attend. The world needed to know the truth. The revelation. Under the blinding lights of the press room, Sophie stood beside Jonathan and Roe. The director of national security stepped to the podium. He spoke gravely about bravery, betrayal, and the unseen battles fought every day. Then he called Sophie forward. Her hands trembled as she accepted the Medal of Civilian Valor. The highest honor a civilian could receive. Applause thundered around her. But Sophie barely heard it. She wasn't thinking about medals or ceremonies. She was thinking about Louis. About Daniel. About the countless people who had risked, and lost, everything. Later, as the crowd dispersed, Jonathan found her standing alone. "You did good," he said quietly. Sophie shook her head. "I didn't save everyone." Jonathan's eyes softened. "Maybe not. But you saved more than you know." He handed her a sealed envelope. Inside was a simple note. In Daniel's handwriting. "I'm sorry, sophomore. I hope someday you'll understand. I never stopped loving you. D." Tears blurred her vision. She pressed the note against her chest. Maybe forgiveness would come with time. Maybe not. But she would never stop fighting for the truth. As Sophie walked out into the crisp evening air, she looked up at the stars. Bright. Infinite. Unbroken. She realized survival wasn't just about fighting battles. It was about choosing hope, even when everything seemed lost. It was about standing up, even when you were broken. It was about loving, even when your heart had been shattered. And it was about believing, in yourself, in others, in the possibility of redemption. The world was messy and complicated. Full of shadows. But it was still worth saving. And she would keep fighting. No matter what. Because some things, some people, were worth the struggle. Always.